So welcome everybody to the second of our still new workshop series, which rejoices in the title of the social analysis of penalty across boundaries. And we're very willing to take suggestions for more catchy names. And today it's a great pleasure to welcome José A Brandariz from the University of A Coruna in Galicia. As people will know, Branda, who's generally goes by that name, is a leading commentator and analyst of the political economy of punishment and a whole host of issues connected to that, principally, latterly, questions of penal policy and migration in Spain and in other contexts. He's one of the editors of an important book called The Political Economy of Punishment Today with Dario Melossi and Máximo Sozzo, and has written a great many things in English, Spanish and other languages on these topics. So it's a huge pleasure to welcome you today, Branda. And his title, Winter is Coming. So sitting in the northern parts of the Northern Hemisphere on the 19th of October, we know this to be true. And yeah, Branda, over to you.
Thank you, Richard. I guess that you can hear me and see me well. Okay, so thank you, Richard and Máximo, for having invited me to be here sharing my thoughts with all of you. Muchas gracias, Richard. Many thanks, Máximo, for this invitation. And let me just begin by saying hello to the many colleagues and friends that are gathered here. Yeah, let me try to share my screen because I prepared a presentation. Yes. I guess that you can see the presentation, right? So yeah, what I intend to present today is based on this paper that you can see here. This is a paper that has been recently released by the European Journal of Criminology. But what I'm trying to do today is something different. In fact, what I'm aiming to do is just to take a number of assumptions and conclusions that I elaborate in this paper, to use them to, carry out a different exploration. This exploration is aimed at comparatively examine penal climate in certain global north regions and certain global south regions. So a prominent penal change is apparently spreading across broad world regions since at least the late 2000s. Somehow unexpectedly, by the end of the first decade of the century, incarceration rates began to decline to a varying extent in many jurisdictions. The world incarceration rate slightly declined by 4.4% from 2008 to 2019. In regional terms, United Nations data show that this shift is particularly affecting Europe, North America, and apparently Africa. Regarding this latter continent, various African countries such as Botswana, Kenya, Mozambique, and Senegal witnessed significant declines of their prison populations from the late 2000s to the late 2010s. However, the notably incomplete data available show that other jurisdictions such as Morocco, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Uganda followed the opposite path. In addition, it is debatable to what extent incarceration rates are an accurate measure of punitiveness in this global South continent, which has some of the least incarcerating nations worldwide. Concerning European countries, incarceration rates fell by more than 15% from 2008 to 2019 in 12 European Union jurisdictions, including Bulgaria, Finland, Germany, the Netherlands, Romania, Spain, and Sweden. This prison population drop has been even more salient in Eastern Europe, where on average incarceration rates plummeted by 37.8% from 2008 to 2019. So this prison downsizing has been especially impressive in countries such as Armenia, Estonia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Latvia, Russia, and Ukraine. And interestingly, the US prison system has also been affected by this downward trend. The US incarceration rate peaked at 765 in 2007 before continuously declining by 17.6%, down to 630 in 2019. Although this trend has been far from homogeneous across US jurisdictions, in the framework of what University of California's Christopher Seeds calls a late mass incarceration scenario, prison rates diminished by more than 30% from 2007 to 2019 in 11 US states, including Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and evidently California. Moreover, prison downsizing has been given an additional boost in the framework of the coronavirus pandemic, which led the coronavirus pandemic and the restrictions associated with the coronavirus pandemic led prison population rates to further dwindle in 2020 in many regions and countries, including again, the US and Europe. Evidently, this increasingly consolidated prison decline starkly contrasts with the previous upward trend, in the framework of which incarceration rates rose globally over the last decades of the 20th century until the late 2000s. That period was thoroughly explored by works that are critical milestones in the field of punishment society studies, such as we all know them, David Garland's The Culture of Control, Jonathan Simon's Governing Through Crime, and Loïc Vacan's Punishing the Poor. In contrast to the period characterized by the so-called punitive turn, wide geographical areas are affected by the current prison downtrend, which has proven to be more than a low-profile shift, circumscribed to a handful of exceptional national cases. Many authors have somehow downplayed the relevance of this shift. By contrast, for other scholars, this phenomenon is so significant that it has been described as an Elisha moment, as an obvious reference to the German sociologist Norbert Elias, and as an evidence of climate change in the penal field. Borrowing the weather lexicon used, among others, by Ian Lauder and Richard Sparks in their public criminology and giving it a Game of Thrones touch, one might say that apparently winter is finally coming. Whether winter is how we expected it to be is a different debate. In my view, at least in the United States, there are reasons to adopt this half-full glass perspective. The momentum gained by Black Lives Matter protests, the success of both Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, and Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th, the phenomenon of the progressive district attorneys and their popularization by a TV series such as Philly DA, the ways in which top Democrat candidates have been forced to publicly repudiate their former tough on crime credentials, the passage of the 2018 First Step Act, and even the ambiguous and flip-flopped rhetoric used by Trump in this field are signs, in my view, that a cold season is spreading across North America, albeit evidently in an agonistic way, as anything else in America these days. Unfortunately, no similar signs can be generally perceived in the European case, where a continent-wide conversation on the current penal climate is still missing. All that being said, the prison downsizing is not a global phenomenon. The prison decline seems to have a particular impact on high-income and middle-income countries. By contrast, incarceration rates have constantly escalated in wide regions of Asia and Oceania, especially in Central and South America in recent years. Concerning Asian jurisdictions, the analyzed indicator significantly mounted in Afghanistan, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines, and skyrocketed in Cambodia, Nepal, Thailand, and Turkey from the late 2000s to late 2010s. A closer exploration of national cases, such as those of the Philippines and Turkey, might cast light on the part played by tough law and order policies within the many authoritarian political platforms blossoming across the world in recent years. However, in order to explore what increasingly appears to be a global north, global south divide in terms of prison changes, the regions to be closely scrutinized, in my view, are Central and South America. In fact, in both subcontinental areas, prison population rates are still rising, with almost only two relevant exceptions, which are Mexico in the north and Chile in the south. Let me put the spotlight in the meridional part of the Americas. In this region, incarceration rates soared by more than 50% in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and Peru, and more than doubled in Bolivia, Paraguay, Venezuela, and Ecuador from 2008 to 2019. In short, almost all South American countries witnessed a significant rise of their primary state punitiveness indicator at the very same time that a new penal phase seemed to be surfacing in opulent global north jurisdictions. There are good reasons, therefore, to further explore the intriguing divergence between penal changes in Europe and the US and penal changes in South America. For these purposes, my paper, the second part of this paper, largely relies on the academic literature on the recent prison downsizing, which suggests that a number of drivers and catalysts deserve particular attention. First point to be explored, the crime drop. A crime punitiveness nexus perspective is patently controversial for many strands of punishment and society studies, especially, as we all know, when it is framed as what Dario Melossi aptly termed as a legal syllogism. However, a number of empirical studies published in recent years have reinvigorated the significance of crime rates in explaining changes in both public punitiveness and state punitiveness. More generally, a variety of authors have claimed that crime rates and crime changes should be given proper relevance in assessing the significance of punitiveness indicators, giving boost to what Garland calls the relative autonomy thesis. In the same spirit, both the US literature and the European literature have stressed the influence of the long-standing reduction of crime rates on the current decarceration phase. This phenomenon, generally known as the crime drop, affects many jurisdictions, albeit unevenly. In the US, in contrast to the much debated alleged crime surge of the last 12 months, the registered violent crime rate fell by 51.6% and the registered property crime rate plummeted by 59% from 1991 to 2019. In the European case, the crime drop is particularly evident in various criminal subfields. the continent-wide homicide rate peaked above 8 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants in the early 1990s and again in the early 2000s, and then dropped to 2.8 in 2018. The EU-wide homicide rate, in turn, has dropped by no less than 39.9% in just 12 years, from 2008 to 2019. The declining trend of EU crime rates is no less noteworthy with regard to other criminal phenomena. EU average rates have dwindled by at least 40% in the case of assault, robbery, burglary, and various types of theft, and to a much lesser extent in the case of sexual assault over this 12-year period. Eurostat data confirm that rape and drug crimes are the only, albeit relevant, exceptions to this general declining trend. In stark contrast, no crime drop can be verified in the South American case. The subcontinent's very high homicide rate, 21 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants in 2018, has remained relatively flat over the last 3 decades, with no sign of eventual decline. Still, Sozzo recently contended, actually as recently as last week, contended that we cannot find a driving factor of the current penal landscape in South America in the field of lethal violence. He should be right, because in a stark contrast to jurisdictions such as Brazil, Peru, and Uruguay, homicide rates have noticeably decreased in Colombia, Ecuador, and Paraguay since the late 2000s. In addition to homicide indicators, a wider perspective on street crime changes in South America should be considered as well. United Nations data are not comprehensive enough to allow scholars to make robust conclusions in this field. However, these United Nations data suggest that neither property crimes nor violent crimes have been clearly on the decline in South American countries over the last 15 years. By disaggregating this data, one can see that in certain specific cases, such as that of property criminal offenses in Brazil, the rising trend is particularly patent. In short, the long-standing, wide-ranging crime drop experienced in various global north jurisdictions is unknown in South America. Thus, a critical facilitating condition of the gradual consolidation of vocabularies of penal moderation is still missing in this region. Second point to be addressed, public punitiveness. In contrast to what has been pointed out right now with regard to South America, in the global north, a long-lasting and broad-encompassing phenomenon such as the crime drop may have actually been crucial in contributing to the prison downsizing. It may have significantly influenced the way in which state agencies, media outlets, social actors, key social actors, and the public in its entirety collectively, albeit agonistically, construct the meaning of crime conflicts and contribute to shape hegemonic models of penality. In fact, the enduring crime drop has undermined the until recently robust nexus associating escalating crime concerns with rising punitiveness and penal populism arrangements. Some data apparently corroborate that crime is gradually losing its former currency as a top public concern. In the US, various fear of crime and concern over crime indicators have been showing a slight decline over the last 2 decades. although results are somehow mixed. Interestingly, one Gallup indicator showing a significant change over time is that related to the percentage of US residents considering the US criminal justice system to be too tough, which has been strikingly soaring in recent years. In the EU, in turn, concern over crime indicators have followed a decreasing path. According to biannual Eurobarometer surveys, the percentage of surveyed EU residents who consider crime to be one of the two most important issues faced by EU countries declined from 20% from 2007 to 2009 to 11.7% from 2017 to 2019. In contrast to this global north trend, Latino barometer data suggest that crime concerns apparently peaked in South American countries in the early 2010s before beginning to slightly recede in the last half of the 2010s. In addition, and that is even more important, Latino barometer indicators show that these concerns are much more prominent for South American national communities than for the European public. Third dimension to be explored in this comparative exploration, which I call additional concerns. In exploring public punitiveness changes in the United States, several authors pointed out that crime concerns are being replaced, superseded by relatively new emerging concerns, such as those related to migration phenomena. It has long been acknowledged that crime is what Jean Komaroff and John Komaroff describe as, quote, a master signifier for the diagnosis of social division, disruption, difference, and disorder. The question to be addressed is whether migration is not taking the lead as a pivotal signifier of order and disorder. In fact, migration control appears to be increasingly performing the same kind of social and political roles usually associated with standard penalty. One might even wonder, in my view, whether Trump's political platform in the field of law and order cannot be seen as an evidence of this shift. Some empirical data give credit to this thesis, at least to a certain extent. In contrast to a decades-long decline in the number of irregular border crossers, according to Gallup estimations, the number of US residents considering immigration as the most important problem faced by the country, by the US, began escalating in 2015 and reached its highest percentage ever in July 2019. Yet, other indicators, I must say, such as that assessing whether US residents consider immigration as a positive or negative phenomenon, show a less bleak scenario. It is not adventurous to say that in Europe, the racialization and xenophobia climate is even more ominous, not least because far-right proposals are garnering traction across the continent and populist far-right cabinets are currently ruling 4 EU countries. Well, 3 in some months or weeks, because the Czech Republic, there has been elections there, the former and still current populist far-right government, the Czech Republic, has actually lost these parliamentary elections. But so far, 4 far-right governments in the EU. So in this regard, Eurobarometer surveys lay bare that immigration concern gained significant momentum in the 2010s. More precisely, the number of surveyed individuals selecting immigration as one of the 2 most important problems faced by EU countries rose from 11.3% from 2007 to 2009 to 20% from 2017 to 2019. And what is more, immigration concerns have been constantly ranking above crime concerns since late 2013. In short, it does seem that immigration is increasingly playing the proxy role of a condensation symbol representing other social anxieties in many jurisdictions, especially in Europe. Once again, the South American scenario is markedly different. The percentage of non-citizen residents is still very low in the subcontinent, 3.6% of the total population in 2020, and with the exception of countries particularly affected by the Venezuelan exodus, such as Chile, Colombia, and Peru, it has not significantly mounted in the recent past. And concerns over immigration are largely playing a minor role in the field of public fears, falling very short of overshadowing crime concerns. Having said that, further research is, in my view, needed to closely explore the intriguing case of Chile, the only South American jurisdiction in which incarceration rates have been dwindling since the late 2000s. Xenophobia indicators in Chile are very high and markedly on the rise, especially in the framework of the current presidential election. In addition, Chile is the only South American country that has developed a wide-ranging global north style, so to speak, in immigration enforcement apparatus, which is contributing to the prison decline, although in a minor way. The last point to be explored is the one that I'm calling the crisis of the war on drugs. The vital part played by the war on drugs in fueling the punitive turn and mass incarceration in the last decades of the 20th century cannot be overstated. Conversely, various authors have highlighted the significance of the climate change in the field of drugs in enabling the prison population decline. Indeed, a number of countries such as Uruguay, Mexico, and various US states have begun to adopt a promising decriminalization and harm reduction agenda in reforming drug policies. So this new policy landscape has had an impact on the penal field. The criminalization of drug markets is slowly leaving behind its former role as main engine of the amplification of penal power. In the US, the percentage of state and federal prisoners combined sentenced for drug crimes dwindled from 24.3% in 2000 to 17.9% in 2018. In the EU, it is certainly true that the number of registered drug crimes has remarkably mounted over the last decade. However, this shift is not having an impact on the prison system. On the contrary, the percentage of prisoners sentenced for drug offenses manifestly diminished in 12 EU and EFTA, European Free Trade Agreement jurisdictions from the late 2000s to the late 2010s, especially, as you can see there, in Croatia, Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Switzerland. In contrast to what has happened in these global north jurisdictions, and in contrast as well to the prominent role played by Uruguay in decriminalizing marijuana, the penal climate in relation to drugs is far from cooling off in South America. In this regard, drug seizure data are particularly revealing. Seizures of both cocaine and its precursors and marijuana have been almost constantly on the rise in all South American jurisdictions over the last 2 decades. Although no continent-wide data on the number of prisoners for drug crimes are available, some national cases lay bare that the war on drugs is any less vibrant today than it was in previous decades. The percentage of prisoners confined for drug crimes has remained constant in Argentina since the late 2000s, around 25% of the incarcerated population. In Brazil, in turn, this percentage mounted by more than 50% from 2008 to 2019. The role played by drug crime sentences in the prison system is clearly more relevant in both national cases than in the EU, where prisoners sentenced for drug crimes accounted for 15% of the sentenced prison population in 2019. Interestingly, also Chile is still embracing the war on drugs impetus. A number of legal, institutional, and logistical measures implemented in the Chilean criminal justice system in the mid-2000s gave a considerable impulse to war on drug efforts. And these efforts have not lost steam since then, with 21.6% of Chilean prisoners incarcerated for drug crimes in 2019. This last point highlights again the intriguing, apparently one-of-a-kind nature of the Chilean case, the main outlier in the current South American penal landscape. And I'm concluding here. This last remark on Chile illustrates that much more competitive research is needed to ascertain why the vocabularies and practices of penal moderation have not taken hold in South American countries so far. This academic effort should elucidate what factors, both background factors and proximate causes, may lead to what Karstedt and her collaborators have recently called a critical juncture, that is, a historical moment in which, quote, change is possible in favor over the status quo, unquote. In the framework of such an exploration, the four aspects taken into consideration in this paper may go a long way in unveiling why no change of penal climate seems to be on site in America's global south. Thank you.